Hi, I'm Cara and I'm a student ambassador at the University of Brighton. And today I'm going to be doing a short talk on my experiences of studying at the University of Brighton. So, this talk will cover a few things, all of which I hope will give you a bit of an idea about what studying a humanities course might be like. We'll take a brief look at studying an English literature degree at the University of Brighton, and we'll talk about what you might expect from your first year on the course. We will also do a short taster session on one of my favourite topics of this degree, which is women writers of the early modern period. So, why did I choose this course? I actually started with English literature and language combined. I chose that course simply because English literature and language was my best A-level and I enjoyed it. After a year, I realised that I really enjoyed English literature, but English language just wasn't really for me. I switched to just English literature, and it was a great decision. And I also chose these courses because they did fit in broadly with my career plans. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I could probably get a job that I enjoyed if I went down this route. After graduating, I continued on a more academic path, so I went and did a master's. But I have friends who went into librarianship, publishing, and teaching, having done an English literature bachelor's. So I loved my first year of study. It never felt like too much for me, and I thought it was a really nice transition between college and university. My first year at university was a mix of lectures, which is sitting in a lecture hall while a lecturer presents, and seminars, which are much more of a group discussion of a text or topic, but they're still led by a lecturer. And there were some workshops too, so that was just kind of a bit more hands-on, looking at the library books and how to use resources kinds of things. I also went on a field trip to Shakespeare's Globe to see The Merchant of Venice, which was great fun. I really enjoyed that. And in my first year I had 3 modules each semester, so kind of different topics. And I usually had, there was usually a lecture and a seminar for each module each week, and these were about an hour and a half each. So it was about 9 hours of contact time a week, lectures and seminars. And I also did a lot of independent study, and that is one thing to remember, is there's a lot of independent study required at university. So these kind of contact hours when you're in uni, they're only half the picture. And in English literature, assessment is largely essay-based, although it does depend on what modules you take. With some presentations, might be creative pieces if you go down a more kind of creative writing route. I handed in a booklet for one thing. I think I did kind of an online blog style page for another module. It all depends on the modules that you take. And in my first term, for my compulsory modules, I was assessed on a presentation and an essay for one module, and the presentation was worth less percentile-wise than the essay, and a booklet of essentially mini essays or kind of discussions for another, so nothing too heavy. And yeah, essays are often worth more in weighting than presentations, but it depends on your course. But certainly that was the case in literature, and that's something also to consider when you're choosing a course. Now we're going to do a brief taster session on one of my favourite topics that I studied during my bachelor's degree, which is women's writing in early modern England. And just for fun, I've put up an image of the frontispiece to a text written by a woman named Margaret Cavendish, and this was first published in 1666. And I really, really love this picture because if you look closely, you can see that it says written by the thrice noble, illustrious and excellent Princess the Duchess of Newcastle. And I just think it might be my favourite introduction ever. The early modern period in England approximately covers the years 1450 to 1750, although the dates do vary slightly depending on your source. And there are a couple of big developments for kind of literature and writing in the early modern period. Firstly, a new type of more efficient printing press was invented in 1440 in Europe, making it easier and cheaper to print texts. Secondly, the commercial theatres, so sites like Shakespeare's Globe, also emerged during this period. And I've listed some well-known male writers of the period, and I'm sure you've all heard of at least one of them. It's a slightly different experience for women and for women writing during this period, however. A lot of early modern literature urges women to be chaste, so no sex outside of marriage, silent and obedient, and this obedience is to their parents and upon marriage to their husbands. And this kind of instruction is especially prevalent within conduct manuals, which are kind of pamphlets or texts which advise people on how they should act. And in early modern literary sources, women are often associated with kind of the domestic and the private, whilst men are more often associated with kind of the public spheres. Writing, especially publishing, is therefore a bit of a problem because it has the potential to be associated with a lack of silence, and publishing especially can be seen as quite a public act. It should also be noted that women are also expected to be very pious during this period, and a lot of the conduct manuals that tell women to kind of be chaste, silent, obedient, etc., justify themselves in religious terms. But women did write, and they did even publish during this period. So over the next few slides, we're going to just be looking at a couple of really cool women who wrote publicly during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. And we're going to be considering how they navigated and even challenged these ideas and pressures. The first woman that we're going to take a brief look at is Mary Sidney, who's an important figure of the Elizabethan literary world. A very quick biography. Sidney was born in 1561 to the aristocratic Sidney family, and when she marries in 1577, she becomes the mistress of Wilton House near Salisbury, and there she kind of turns the house into a sort of literary group, literary salon known as the Wilton Poets, and it's made up of a lot of very prominent poets of the era and writers. And her brother, Philip Sidney, is well known as a literary figure and courtier. After his death, Mary turns to the genres of eulogy and translation and begins to write and publish her own work. And both of these are considered kind of suitably feminine genres of writing. And they're kind of what's kind of interesting about them is they're sort of creatively framed by male others. So the original author of the translation or the male relative that the eulogy is for. After Philip Sidney's death, Mary begins finishing, kind of air quotes, a set of 150 psalms, which Philip has begun translating. And this is widely circulated in manuscript form. I say finishing with kind of air quotes because by the time he dies, Philip has completed 44 of the translations, which are less than a third. Nonetheless, Mary Sidney frames this achievement as a kind of work that isn't really her own. This quote, "But he did warp, I weaved this web to end," is from the prefatory poem of the complete manuscript. And critics have picked up on the fact that her sort of saying that Philip Sidney warped whilst she weaved suggests that Philip Sidney was much more active in shaping the text than her by kind of creating the warp or the outline, and saying that she weaves the web to end sort of suggests that she's kind of just finishing this off, and it gives her brother a lot more kind of agency and ownership over the final outcome of the text. And I've just got a couple of extra notes on Sidney here. So Mary Sidney also publishes other translations under her own name. And one of these, Antonius, is the first play in English that is written by a woman to be published, which is awesome. And her original poem, The Doleful Lay of Clorinda, was also published in Spencer's Astrophel, and it's published alongside other eulogies for Philip Sidney, and it is a eulogy for Philip Sidney. And again, throughout most of her writing, she sticks within this acceptable genre of translation and eulogy, which kind of suggests a removal of female imaginative agency. So her work is kind of consistently framed by these male figures and male influences, even as she sort of pushes the boundaries and continues to publish. The second figure that we're going to be taking a quick look at is Emilia Lanya, sometimes called Amelia Lanya. She's not an aristocrat, but she is the daughter of a court musician and later marries another court musician, so she's kind of brought up on the edge of the court and has a contact with this space. In 1611, Lanya publishes Salve Deus Rei Judaeorum, which translates to All Hail God, King of the Jews, and this is a book of poetry. And this makes Lanya one of the first English women to publish a book of poetry under her own name. And this book's also been considered a kind of proto-feminist work. This book presents biblical offence from the viewpoint of women, and there's also a poem called An Apology for Eve, which discusses the idea of women's freedom and equality. Lanya justifies her work in a number of ways. A key way that she does this is by positioning her work as a kind of religious piece, or within the kind of trope of religion, because she's discussing the Bible. And this fits into the notions of piety and women being pious. And another way that Lanya justifies her writing and manages to kind of almost sidestep potential accusations of being outspoken, being public, not being silent, is by suggesting that the word hasn't really come from her at all, but it's come from God. And in this quote that I've popped up on the slide, which comes from a poem at the back of the book titled To the Doubtful Reader, she says that this work was delivered unto me in sleep many years before, that she was appointed to perform this work, and that she gave it the very same words I received in sleep as the title. Here, Lanya suggests that poetry, or her poetry, was essentially given to her by God in a kind of prophetic dream. By saying that she gave the very same words that she received in sleep to the text, she implies that even the words are not necessarily her own at all. Once again, this work is not framed as specifically the writer's own voice. Like Sidney, Lanya frames the text as creatively shaped by a male influence, and positions herself, in this case, as more of a mouthpiece than a writer, with full creative agency. And this kind of sense that the work has potentially been delivered to her in a kind of prophetic style dream insists on Lanya's continued piety and duty to God, which we've already seen are very important traits that early modern women are expected to emulate, because it suggests that in doing this writing and publishing these texts, she's actually carrying out God's work. And one final thing that I wanted to quickly note in relation to both Amelia Lanya and Mary Sidney is this. Lanya begins this volume of poetry with dedications for several influential women in a bit of patronage or payment for her writing. And one of the women whom she dedicates this volume to is Mary Sidney. And this kind of emphasises Mary Sidney's continued importance within the literary world, although there are several other ways that this is emphasised and kind of can be found as well. So I really hope that you enjoyed the presentation and then the taster talk. I hope that you found them both interesting. Please don't forget that you will be undertaking a topic in the wider area during this upcoming week. And please don't forget that myself and other student ambassadors will be happy to help if you need us. I think there's going to be kind of uni-buddy chat sessions to make sure that we can all catch up, and if you need a hand, we can help out there. So don't worry too much about that. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of the summer school. And here's just a few references for some of my sources, just in case you needed them.